Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar on meaningful online learning. My name is Mahal Freh, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. Joining us again are Dr. Neda Dabbagh and Dr. Genia Zghaib. For those who are new to the webinar, Dr. Neda Dabbagh is a professor and director of the Learning Technologies Division in the College of Education and Human Development at George Mason University. She has over 20 years of experience in learning design and technology. Her latest book is Meaningful Online Learning, which was published in 2019. She has participated as a keynote and invited speaker at over 40 local, national, and international conferences and venues. She has also served as a consultant for numerous higher education, corporate, and government organizations, as well as research institutes, and has led a number of learning technologies design and development projects, including the award-winning Learning Asset Technology Integration Support Tool and the Tech Select Decision Aid mobile application. Dr. Genia Zghaib is an assistant professor of instructional design and technology at the University of Belamend in Beirut. She has a PhD in learning technologies design research and 2 master's degrees in educational psychology and applied linguistics. At Belamend University, she served as the head of the education department for 3 years, and she is currently the academic coordinator for the Instructional Design Master's Program. Dr. Genia Zghaib has over 15 years of teaching and professional development experience in both K-12 and higher education, including her work as a faculty fellow for the Mason Online Center, where she worked with faculty who are teaching online in reviewing their courses and providing support and professional development. Today's session, Neda and Genia will build on Sunday's webinar, and they will discuss different instructional strategies that can be used to support meaningful online learning, and how to think about technology tools and their affordances in ways that enable the implementation of these strategies and the enactment of the meaningful learning principles. Before we get started, a few things that I want to point out. The chat is available, so please use that for any comments or if you want to share your thoughts with participants. I will be joining any discussions and answering any questions related to our topic for today. For anything else in terms of like IT support or any other questions you might have, the staff from the National E-Learning Center will be responding to that. Also, we want to avoid some of the issues that happened last time. So if you want to request or you want to receive a certificate of attendance, we will be sharing a link for you to sign up. Just put in your name as you want it to appear on the certificate and your email address, and we will send you the certificate a week from today. It doesn't matter what your name is on Zoom or how you logged in. Just make sure that you fill out the form. We will be sharing it in the chat every 10-15 minutes. If you have any questions, please post them to the Q&A, and Dr. Neda and Genia will answer those at the end of the webinar. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the National E-Learning Center's website, as well as YouTube for you to access. And that's all for me for now. Genia, Neda, you want to start?
Yes. Thank you, Maha. Thank you, Maha. Thanks, Genia. So yes, welcome to the second webinar of this series about online teaching and learning. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see that you guys are excited. I've been seeing the chats regarding this. So again, thank you for joining us. And if you haven't attended the first session, then you can certainly take a look at the recording, which will be sent to you as Maha said. So in the first webinar, if you haven't joined us, we talked about the 5 principles for meaningful online learning. I'm going to recap those principles in a moment, And then in this webinar, we are going to take a deep dive into the technologies of supporting meaningful online learning and supporting online learning in general. So we're going to take a deep dive into how to use technology to support meaningful online learning instructional strategies. We are going to unpack the affordances of learning technologies. And I looked up this word in Arabic and it means kudurat. So we are going to look at the affordances, kudurat or meyizat, of the technologies that we use to support online learning. And we're going to demonstrate how these affordances can be leveraged for online teaching and learning. And then the webinar on Thursday is going to be about developing online assessments, which, as you know, it's really very important to complete the circle of designing meaningful online learning. I wanted to also just say that the whole series or the webinars that we're doing, Dr. Zghaib and I, is to sort of give you a theoretical and pedagogical underpinnings or framework to support your online teaching and online design initiatives. So if we can move to the next slide, thanks, Genia. So this is what we covered in the first webinar. So we gave you sort of a framework, if you will, or a model that you can keep thinking about as you design and as you teach in an online environment, right? Online or blended environment. So this meaningful online learning framework, if you remember, has 5 principles. Again, it's a principled framework. There's been a lot of research about these principles and how these principles impact learning and how they provide engagement for the students and authentic learning, etc. So this is what we covered last time. We presented these 5 principles. And one thing I want to make sure is that these principles, as I mentioned several times last time, are interdependent. So if you look at the, I'm going to try to use the annotation tool here to draw. If you look at the lines in this figure, you could see that there are lines joining from active to cooperative. There's a line going from constructive to authentic. There's a line going from intentional to cooperative, etc. There's a line going from intentional to manipulative. So the idea, intentional and active. So the idea is that to really understand that these principles are interconnected, and to keep in mind that if you design an activity that supports active learning, then you're pretty much also designing the activity to support at least one other principle of the meaningful online learning framework. And we also demonstrated last time how these principles can be designed to support synchronous and asynchronous learning. So I'm going to try to erase. Let me see if I can erase. Yeah. Oh, okay, now we're good. Okay, thanks. So let's move on to the next slide. Thanks, Genia. So really, basically, the 5 takeaways from last webinar were that you should engage your learners in active learning. You should engage your learners in constructive learning. You should engage your learners in cooperative learning. You should engage your learners in authentic learning. And you should engage your learners in intentional learning. So now I'm going to start our second webinar. So really the objectives for this webinar are, first, we're going to talk about the affordances of learning technologies. Again, the word affordances means kudurat or meizat. And then we're going to talk about the instructional strategies for meaningful online learning and how we can use the affordances of technology to support these instructional strategies. And of course, we are going to show you examples of use. So let me start with a poll. Again, the word affordances is qudurat or mayizat. And we're going to start by having you respond to a brief poll. So you should be seeing this poll on your screen now. And this is, multiple answers. You can select more than one answer. It's not a just one correct answer. So I would like to know, how do you perceive educational technologies in general? What is your perception of learning technologies or educational technologies? So take a look at these options and let us know, how do you perceive educational technologies? Are we getting answers, Genya?
Yeah, so far 90, almost around 100 have responded.
Okay, because I can't see the results. I can only see the poll.
Yeah, we encourage you all to participate in these polls, please. So I'm gonna end the poll in a few seconds. If you want to respond, you still have around 20 seconds.
Some people are asking, they cannot see the link. I'm not sure how to.
Maybe it's because they're joining on their phones. Sometimes when people join on their phones, they don't see the polls.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to end the poll. We have around 143 responses. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. Do you see the results, Nada?
I don't.
Okay, I'm sharing them, so I'm not sure why you're not seeing them, but it shows that the majority selected. You do? Okay.
Yeah, now I see them. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is great, actually, because the majority have responded that technology can improve student engagement, as is highlighted in the red, and that technology can promote innovative teaching techniques, which is great. Technology can transform learning. Technology can empower students to learn. Amazing. So the one that should get the least, actually, nods or, acknowledgement is the first one, because thank you for doing this, because I'm going to now, if we can move to the second slide. Technology is definitely not just a tool. So as you know, there's been a lot of debates in the literature, debates in the research, even debates between scholars and educators. Some scholars and researchers, think of technology just as a tool. So it's sort of like a means to an end. I am certainly not a proponent of that. I vehemently will say that technology is not just a tool. That different technologies have different affordances, which means they have different qudurat, different mayizat, which means that they have different capabilities or possibilities for action. So I want to stress this point, and I think most of you are in agreement with this based on the results of the poll that we just did. And if you have heard of Marshall McLuhan, for those of you who have studied communication theory, he made a big statement and a lot of research to say that the medium is the message. So think about it. If you hear something on the radio, a piece of news on the radio, only audio, it's going to have a different impact on you rather than if you heard it on a video or saw it on TV. So different mediums have different impacts on the message. They shape the message. They shape the way the message is going to be understood by the recipient. So this is actually a big acknowledgement that supports what I'm saying, is that technology is not just a tool. So let's take this a little bit further. And let's take a look at a pencil, if you see on this next slide, right? This is a pencil. We all know what a pencil is. A pencil is a technology. It's a type of technology. It's not a digital technology, but it's a tool, right? So let's see if we can take this concept of affordances a little bit further. So if you think about a pencil, tell us in the chat, just briefly, what can you do with the pencil? Of course, you know, in addition to its primary affordance, which we will see now, what you think its primary function is, or its primary affordance, but think outside the box. Tell us what can you do with a pencil? Draw.
You can see the chat, Nada, right?
Right now I'm seeing it, yeah, thanks. Create what? You need to let us know, okay. You can use it to knock, absolutely. Pointing, counting. You could use it to hold your hair up, exactly.
Nice, Maha.
You could use it to put it on your ear, exactly. You could use it to create a structure, yeah.
Bookmark. I like this one.
You could use it as a bookmark, absolutely, if you're reading a book. I'm not sure you can eat it, but you can use it to close two doors. Okay. Great, you can use it as a ruler. Excellent, excellent. Potentially for crochet. Exactly. You could use it to set a fire. Okay, thanks, guys. This is great. So the idea, this sort of supports this idea of affordances, meaning that different technologies have different capabilities or affordances for use or for action. Now, of course, someone said we can use it as a hanger. Absolutely. Of course, the primary function of a pencil is to write or to draw or to erase. Those are sort of the primary functions or uses for a pencil. But as you can see, there's also several other uses that you can think about for using this tool. So there are also negative affordances, right? I mean, you could potentially hit someone with it by mistake. You could potentially hurt yourself if the lead is really pointy, etc. So this whole idea of affordances, there are negative affordances, there are positive affordances, and there are primary affordances, and there are, you know, secondary affordances. So I'm trying to get you to understand this concept, because when you think about learning technologies and educational technologies, you really need to be thinking about these affordances. What can I do with this technology? What is the most beneficial teaching and learning activity that I could do with this technology? So this is sort of another concept, if you will, or construct to be thinking about as you design online learning experiences. So if we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Genia. So in this next slide, again, kind of based on this theory of affordances or the concept of affordances, we are presenting to you 6 categories of learning technologies. Again, 6 categories of learning technologies. You could see at the top here, we have a category called communication or collaboration and communication tools. You could see on the right, we have a category called assessment and analytics. And then down further, we have a category of technologies called immersive tools. We have a category of technologies called knowledge representation tools, or what we call mind tools, tools that help your learners think with. We have a category called information search and resource management tools. And finally, on the top left, side left, we have a category called content creation tools. So again, we are classifying the technologies that we use based on their primary affordance for teaching and learning, right? So also keep in mind that these technologies can be used by us, the instructors or the faculty. They can also be used by students. They can also be used by educators. So different users will probably use those technologies differently. So it's really important to take a look at this framework again of how you classify technologies in order to be able to use them for their primary affordances in teaching and learning contexts, specifically in online learning, which is what we're talking about. So let's move to the next slide, and then we'll have you share some things. So on this next slide, I know it's a little bit busy, but you could see we are starting with content creation tools, right? So let me see if I could annotate here. But basically, we are starting with content creation tools right over here. We are starting with content creation tools, right? So we want you to think about content creation tools, and the name actually is sort of very revealing about this category of technologies. So we want you to think about content creation tools. Of course, if you use learning management systems like we do, at George Mason University, we use Blackboard as a learning management system. Learning management systems like Blackboard, like Moodle, you see Moodle as an example on the right. Google Classroom can also be considered a learning management system, but there are also web publishing tools like Weebly or Wix that also allow you to create content. And there are also video creation tools like Screencast-O-Matic and YouTube that also allow you to create content, right? So the main primary affordance of content creation tools is to create online instructional content and deliver it to your audience, to your students. So it's primarily used by faculty like us. It's primarily used by instructional designers. And we've looked at some of these examples. And most learning management systems have specific features in them that allow you to create content. So I think, Genia, we want to do a quick Mentimeter here.
Yes. If your phones can scan QR codes, there's a QR code on the left of the screen. You may scan it. I'll give you a few seconds to do so. And then I'm going to share with you the Mentimeter. Those of you who don't have a scanner, you can go to menti.com and
just share with us, like, what technologies, what content creation technologies have you used to design online learning? You can mention the technologies that you've used to design content.
Yes,
or to create.
The question is there. Those of you who are able to access the website have already started posting. Those of you who haven't scanned the QR code yet, you can go to www.menti.com and put the code 7406028. Enter this code and you should be here.
Great. It's coming along. It looks like you're all using learning management systems to create content. You're using PowerPoint. Absolutely. PowerPoint is another content creation tool. Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams has other affordances as well, as we're going to see, but it does have a feature that allows you to create content for sure. Anything else you're seeing, Genia, that I'm not seeing?
No, but I see that the majority of the attendees are using Blackboard, Google Classroom, because we see they're like the largest in font.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that Blackboard is the largest. Yeah.
Yeah.
PowerPoint is getting a little bit bigger too. Okay, great. So one last thing I would say about this category, content creation tools, is that it supports the active, constructive, and authentic principles of meaningful online learning. And we're going to show you more specific examples of how this category does that. Okay, let me move now to the next category, which is what we're calling collaboration and communication tools. So let me again try to highlight this. It's right here. I use the arrow. Let me actually use another let me use the draw tool maybe, or this arrow. So this is where we are right now. We are doing this collaboration and communication tools category. And this category actually, obviously also from its name, it's allowing us to create learning interactions that support collaboration and communication. It's my favorite category for supporting meaningful online learning. So the primary affordance of this category in online settings is to facilitate synchronous and asynchronous interactions to help reduce isolation. Remember last time we talked about how online learning settings really drive students to become isolated, and there's a lot of attrition. So this is a category of technologies that really helps you keep students focused, because it's a communication tool. It prevents isolation. And it helps you personalize the learning experience, because you could give them specific feedback, one-on-one feedback or group feedback using this category of technologies. So again, this category of technologies supports the cooperative and collaborative principle of meaningful online learning. And as you could see on the right, the examples under this category of tools: WhatsApp is definitely a collaboration communication tool. Skype is a synchronous communication tool. Google Drive is an asynchronous communication tool. Zoom, which is what we're doing right now, is a synchronous communication tool. So we want you to tell us again in the chat, what collaboration and communication tools have you been using in your online teaching? And of course, keep in mind that learning management systems have embedded features that allow you to do communication and collaboration. So if you want to mention those specifically, that would be good too. So tell us what collaboration communication tools have you been using? If you mention Blackboard, tell us exactly what within Blackboard. Like, are you using discussion forums? Are you using wikis? We mentioned wiki spaces last time as a technology that supports collaboration. Teams, absolutely. Teams is, so Microsoft Teams supports collaboration a lot. Some are using wikis.
Discussion forums, Nada, on Blackboard. Someone
Which one? The discussion forum. Okay, on Blackboard.
Discussion
Great.
forums.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Telegram. I can see WhatsApp. Blogs. I'm glad to see blogs there. Definitely blogs are a means of communication for sure. They allow commentary and they belong under this category. WebEx for synchronous.
Email, as simple as that.
Email, exactly. We forgot about email. Absolutely. Yeah. Email is a form of asynchronous communication. Wonderful, wonderful. So I could see, and WebEx, I can see that we're starting to really, you know, focus on those categories. Great, great. So again, what principle does, what meaningful online learning principle does this category of technologies support? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, right? We said that it supports the cooperative or collaborative principle, right, of meaningful online learning. So now I'm going to turn it over to Genia to talk about the rest of the technology categories.
Great. Thank you, Nada. And so the next category of technologies for meaningful online learning is assessment and analytics. And I'm sure you are all struggling with online assessments right now due to the COVID-19 transition to online learning. I'm sure everybody now is struggling. How do I do fair assessments? How do I make sure that my students have learned? How do I track their progress? Of course, there are tools and technologies for this, and there are strategies for this. And because it's a very important topic, we have dedicated the third webinar for this topic, for assessment specifically. So today we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we want to give you just briefly an idea of what these assessment and analytics tools look like. And these are like synchronous student response systems and digital portfolios. Student response systems are similar to Mentimeter that you just saw now, that you just used. They're also similar to the polling tool of Zoom, the one that we used also with you today in the webinar. Polling tools are features that exist in Microsoft Teams. You can use them in the meeting in Microsoft Teams. You can use them in WebEx. You can use them in Zoom. So these are polling tools that are integrated within the learning management systems. There are also standalone student response systems and polling tools, such as Poll Everywhere that you see here on the screen, the word cloud created by Poll Everywhere, and Mentimeter, the tool that we saw today. So there are many interesting tools. As for analytics, in every learning management system, there's usually analytics. You can track your student engagement. You can track how many of your students have accessed the material that you posted, how many of your students have completed the activities. Of course, we will be talking more about this in the next webinar. So, but we would like to know from you, if you have been using any online assessment tools, we would like you to share it with us. Here's a new QR code for this Mentimeter. If you have your phones ready with you, you can scan this QR code. I'm also going to share the Mentimeter page. Here we go. Well, the colors are a bit light. Someone has already started sharing, so this is great. So this is the code for this one is 69, 68, 87, and 4. We already can see there is Zoom, quizzes. So Zoom for the student response systems, Edmodo, Blackboard quiz. Of course, Microsoft Teams. In Microsoft Teams, there's the polling and there's the Microsoft Forms inside Teams that you can use for assessment. Mentimeter, questionnaires, some new names here, Wendigo, some new
Also
tools.
share with us if you've used any analytics tools in your learning management systems.
Yeah.
Have you ever explored any analytics tools that show you or tracks your students, contact with the LMS, etc.? And then there was someone that said Google Docs. I'm not really sure how Google Doc can be used.
Yeah, Google Docs, Google Forms can be used as assessment tools, but Google Docs cannot be used as assessment tools. Okay, so this is something we want you to be aware of. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. And digital portfolio. That's great. Yeah.
We're going to talk about that on Thursday. That's a great digital assessment tool, and it falls under assessment and analytics. Absolutely.
Great. So while assessments are supposed really to assess whether your students have learned, assessments can be constructive, can be learning tools. And therefore, they do support the principles of meaningful online learning, the active, the constructive principles, because they do support learning when they are meaningful. Of course, we will talk more about this in the next webinar. The next technology category is immersive technologies. Immersive tools usually refer to tools used to create digital environments that allow participants to be totally immersed in the context that the environment represents, specifically when the environment they represent cannot be reachable in a real life. Examples of immersive environments are simulations, educational games, and virtual reality experiences that require wearables, such as virtual reality glasses, for example. Some simulations that exist out there are virtual labs. Maybe some of you have used these labs, and we mentioned those in the first webinar. But the one you see on the top right of the screen is an example of a virtual lab that the students can access. They can conduct virtual experiments, share with the class in a risk-free environment. The beauty of simulations is that students can really practice real-life experiences in a virtual environment with no risk on them. Another example of immersive tools are games. They put the player in a digitally created world to interact with the elements of the world. Of course, there are games that are simple, they are 2D. The students can play them, especially in lower class levels, but there are also immersive games that ask the learners to create avatars, to be part of these games, to be a character where they go and interact with other players inside these environments. For example, the educational game SimCity. It gives the players the opportunity to practice city and environmental planning while playing together, while talking to each other and interacting. Similarly, the popular game Minecraft, for example, also it has an education version that supports different subjects and skills. Minecraft has a website for education. You can go to the website, you see that you can integrate language arts in it, math, science within Minecraft. The students can be playing, but at the same time, learning the content. So these environments do motivate learners to learn these technologies and enhance their learning. And they do support the principle of active, constructive, collaborative, and cooperative learning, and authentic. Of course, authentic is the principle that is highly highlighted in these games. So we would like to hear from you and find out from you if you've been using any simulations and games that you would like to share with us in your online teaching. Here's the QR code. I'm also going to share the Mentimeter for this. So if you've been using any immersive technologies in your online teaching, please share them with us.
It could be just, if you're using games or simulations, or it doesn't have to have a specific name, but virtual speech, that's interesting.
Google Earth, excellent.
Yep.
Google Earth is being used a lot in education.
Great.
Padlet, I think you meant Padlet or Pandlet, I'm not sure. Because the Padlet, we know, we'll talk about it in a minute, it supports another technology category. Lifesaver. Any other technologies? Let's see, Blackboard Ultra. I've never tried this one. Nada, are you familiar with Blackboard Ultra?
Yeah, we use Blackboard Ultra for collaboration mainly. I'm not sure it supports immersive, but maybe I'm not familiar with that. But I don't know if it supports immersive 3D virtual environments.
Yeah.
But in the health field, I'm sure there's a lot of visual 3D simulations. Have you used any animated? PowerPoint can support simulations. That's a good one.
Yeah, there's also some virtual museums, Nada, also that are out there that can be used for teaching and education. There's also the PhET simulations there in science, PhET. They're also in the sciences used to teach science. They're also very good simulations. This is great. Thank you for sharing. If there's anything else you'd like to share, please feel free to share it in the chat. Our next category, technology category, is knowledge representation tools, or mind tools, also referred to as mind tools. The affordances of these tools include knowledge representation, that is using technology to represent what the learner has or in his or her mental structure. So it's a representation of how we view and perceive the content that's being learned. These tools afford knowledge representation, knowledge organization, organizing information in a way that is comprehensible and understandable by others, and synthesis and work with any discipline and subjects. What I really like about these tools is that they can help learners synthesize complex readings, complex topics, to make them more interlinked, connected, so that they understand this difficult content better. They also then represent information visually that supports comprehension and remembering of information. Examples of mind tools include learner-created databases and spreadsheets, like, for example, Excel. Simply, Excel can help them represent information in a table format. Videos, concept maps. Last time we showed you an example of Kaggle and how mind maps and concept maps can be created in order to show how information is interlinked and connected to each other. There's also Padlet that you see on the top right of this screen. You see Padlet, an example. One of you mentioned it in the Immersive Technologies, but Padlet is really a good tool in brainstorming and sharing ideas. And it allows you to create different types of boards. Some of these boards, it's a digital board. I did not mention this, but the cool thing about Padlet is that it can help you create a timeline with the information that you have created, or it can help you create, show how ideas are interconnected and linked to each other. It's really a very interesting tool. If you haven't used it before, you should try to use it. Other examples of mind sharing of knowledge representation tools are Canva. If you've used Canva before, it helps students like design. It's kind of a graphic design tool, but it helps the learners represent information in a very nice way. Infograms are also very good tools used in knowledge representation. So what's really important about these tools is that, as I said earlier, and I repeat, they help you show how ideas are interconnected and related to each other in a visual way so that the learners can remember this information. If you've used any knowledge representation tools, we would like you please to share them with us on this Mentimeter as well. I'm going to share also the Mentimeter page for this.
Yeah, and maybe we should kind of move a bit quickly to get through the other stuff.
And
I want to mention also that mind tools, knowledge representation tools that Dr. Zghaib just explained are usually in the hands of the learner, right? So it's the learners that are using them, not you guys as educators.
They're student-centered, which is key in online learning. So what technologies have you used for knowledge representation in your online courses? We would like you to share with us any technologies that you've used.
Yeah, I saw someone said concept maps. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Concept maps are a great technology for knowledge representation, for engaging your students in representing their understanding visually. Any other visual tools that you guys have used?
Excel, YouTube, visual map.
I'm not sure YouTube is a knowledge representation tool. Yeah, it belongs more in the collaboration and communication category.
FET is more the immersive technology. Kaggle, infographics, very good infographics representing data in a very visual way that can help the learners understand how ideas are connected. You know, a simple smart art in Word is a knowledge representation tool. Posters, digital posters. Edpuzzle is more of an assessment tool. It's a formative assessment tool.
Right.
Nearpod, mind maps.
Mind maps, absolutely, mind maps.
Like Kaggle, like Bubbles, MindMeister, a lot of tools that exist out there that you can use for mind mapping. Time graphics, Glogster. Quizlet is an assessment tool. PowerPoint could be a knowledge representation tool if we're using a lot of smart art in it. Okay, great. So we need to move on. Infographics, excellent. We're
to the final category. Yep.
Yeah, we're going to move on to the last technology category, which is information search and resource management, which is internet search engines, content collection, and aggregation tools. According to non-profit Project Information Literacy, 92% of students turn to internet search engines when faced with an information-seeking problem. Okay, this shows how important search engines such as Google are for today's students. They go to Google, they go to Wikipedia to seek answers, and because that's the only place they go to on the internet that's helpful. Unless the search, you have to be careful, unless the search is intentional and it is goal-oriented, meaningful learning does not happen. It means you can read tons of articles on Google every day, but learning is not intentional. It is not geared towards a goal that the students have to complete, like a task related to the search that they do. This means that learning doesn't necessarily happen. So this technology category includes internet search engines, but it's not limited to those internet search engines. Other tools that help students collect and aggregate information, such as Zotero, such as Digo, that helps them aggregate, categorize, and group information together and annotate it, are considered as information search and resource management tools. These are really interesting tools because students don't only search, but they also bookmark them, and they can these are social bookmarking tools, meaning that the students can do this individually, but they can also do these in groups, which is the whole purpose of online learning. Students should interact peer-to-peer, learner-to-learner online, and these tools do afford this kind of interactivity. Now that I don't think we have time to share examples.
Let's keep
okay,
going.
I'm going to turn it over now to Nada to talk about the instructional strategies for MOL.
Thanks, Genia. And I want to mention to everybody, we don't expect you to be experts at this classification of technology yet. Can you go back one more slide? No, okay. The classification of technologies yet. So you can, you really have to think back to the concept of affordances and what we started this webinar with. It means that, different technologies have different primary affordances. So you really need to keep that in mind as you use technology to support online teaching and learning. So you really need to look into the affordances of each of these categories. And in the book, we really explain that really well and show you examples of how these technologies can be used for their primary affordance. And as Genia mentioned, how do they support meaningful online learning? That is the whole point of using them to support meaningful online learning. So for the final part of our webinar today, we want to introduce you to instructional strategies. And so I looked this up in Arabic, and instructional strategies, as you know, is طرق or طرائق تعليمية, استراتيجيات تعليمية. So they are called methods of teaching or methods of designing learning activities. So again, طرق تعليمية أو استراتيجيات التعليمية. So this is what we mean by instructional strategies. And we want to introduce this framework again, another framework to think about how you approach these teaching methods, if you will, in your classes and in your online learning. So as you could see from this figure, and I am going to again try to use one of the drawing tools. As you could see up here, we have a category that I'm calling exploratory strategies, right? So there's a category up here that we're calling exploratory instructional strategies. And then we have a category down here, which we are calling supportive instructional strategies. And finally, we have a category out here that we are calling dialogic strategies. So again, we have three types of instructional strategies. Exploratory up here at the top, and we have supportive down here on the right, And we have Dialogic, which is on the far left. So the idea behind these instructional strategies, again, instructional strategies now are things that you use, you as educators, you as teachers, you as faculty, you as instructional designers. You're trying to make determinations, what types of instructional strategies am I going to use in this course? And, am I going to include role playing? For example, role playing up here is an example of an exploratory strategy. Am I going to include problem solving activities? And then in the supportive category, as you could see, there are 3 types of instructional strategies. There's one called scaffolding, how do you scaffold the learning process. There's another one called modeling and explaining, which we do, a lot of us as faculty. We model, we explain on the whiteboard, we write things down for the students on the blackboard. We're trying to explain mathematical equations and other types of constructs and concepts. And we also do a lot of coaching and mentoring. So these 3 instructional strategies here, coaching and mentoring, modeling and explaining, and scaffolding, are in that supportive strategy. And finally, we have dialogic instructional strategies. And in the dialogic is when you provide opportunities for your learners to engage in dialogue, engage in conversation, engage in in online discussions, in commenting on each other's blogs, in project-based learning. If you're doing collaboration and social negotiation, you also want to engage them in reflection. We talked a little bit about that last time. So as you could see, probably the technology that best supports your implementation of dialogic strategies would be the collaboration and communication technology category that we just presented. And for the supportive instructional strategies category, you can use content creation tools and information search and management tools and assessment and analytics tools to support this category. So as you could see, this is another framework that you can use to help make sure that your designs are supporting meaningful online learning. So let us go to specific examples of use. And we are going to give you 3 examples here. If we could, right. So we are going to give you, the first example I'm going to give you is specific to the supportive category of instructional strategies. So as you could see here on the right, this is an infographic. We've talked a lot about infographics so far. Canva is an example of an infographic. And this is an infographic that has been created by NOAA. NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States. And they create infographics to help people, to help citizens actually understand how we can take better care of our oceans, of our waters. So if you look on the bottom left-hand side, you will see that an infographic is classified as an content creation tool, right? And I'm just looking again for the arrow here. So as you could see down here, we are using content creation tools, which is this infographic, in order to create an infographic, in order to support your students in learning something. So here we are providing scaffolding. This supports the instructional strategy of scaffolding. And basically what this infographic is telling the citizens, what do you do if you're out and about, and how do you support the waters, and how do you make sure that we are not polluting, and what can you do in your immediate neighborhood in order to help keep our oceans clean. So this is an example of how to implement this instructional strategy of scaffolding in your online course. Now I'm going to turn it over to Genia to talk to us about an example of how to use the exploratory strategy of problem solving.
Okay, Nata, thank you. Do you think you can remove this red arrow, or we just ignore it?
Yes, I'm going to do that. Yep.
Okay. So the second example is based on the exploratory strategies, specifically problem-solving exercises that we use all the time in our classes. Here's an example of a learning activity that you can design to engage your students in problem solving, to engage students in active and constructive learning, which are two of the principles of meaningful online learning. This activity can be designed, can be developed using collaboration and communication tools and knowledge representation tools. You can see here there's the fishbone diagram that you can find online. There are many templates that you can find online for a fishbone diagram. This example shows how a fishbone diagram is used to analyze the causes of missed basketball free throws. The fishbone technique is a simple method of mapping causes of a problem and showing factors that predict success in the problem space. To add a collaborative and communication aspect to this assignment, learners can share their diagrams on VoiceThread, which is a technology that affords audio, video, or text feedback among students and instructors. You should try VoiceThread because it's a very powerful tool in creating this kind of communication and collaboration. Any media can be uploaded there and students can post comments to each other and feedback. Here's another example of an exploratory strategy that is role-playing. This is an example of a storyboarding activity through the tool Storyboard That. If you can see there in front of you, the students are immersed in the learning activity. So this is an example of an immersive technology that can help learners engage in authentic and real-life experiences in an activity. I highly recommend it if you're teaching courses that require this kind of role-playing debates type of activities. It's really interesting. Here's an example of dialogic strategies, specifically collaboration and negotiation. You might see a lot of text on this slide, but that's because it's an activity I assigned in one of my courses. I know it's a lot of text. You don't have to read all of this. I will explain it. So this activity is based on the dialogic instructional strategy of collaboration and social negotiation. The students were asked to complete some readings and watch videos related to the elements of online courses. So this was a course, which is a seminar in online learning course. They were given the choice to use Bubbles or Kaggle to complete the task in order to synthesize the readings and show how the ideas are interconnected in the reading. I usually like to use Kaggle because Kaggle allows collaboration. So when students want to collaborate together in mind mapping, Kaggle is a nice free tool that they can use. In this activity, the students engaged in several dialogic strategies at the same time: dialogic, collaboration, social negotiation, and reflection. So the three of them were tackled in this activity. So you don't have to stick to one, several ones can be integrated. After the students created the mind map, they had to reflect on a sample online course and analyze it using the mind map that they created. In order to complete these tasks fully online, as is the case now in our courses where we have to teach fully online, students could use Skype or any other video conferencing tool to meet online and to analyze these courses. Finally, students were asked to read other groups' work and comment on each other in a discussion forum. So this is what a discussion forum looks like. This is an example. This discussion forums usually support the dialogic strategy of articulation, where students reflect, articulate their ideas. So this is an example also from my course, linked to the activity that you saw on the previous slide. Most learning management systems such as Moodle, Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams, Blackboard, and Canvas have discussion forum features that we highly encourage you to use in order to promote this the dialogic strategies. They're powerful tools in online learning because they provide the opportunity to discuss and negotiate ideas online. So versus what happens in the classroom and face-to-face, the online version of the discussions that happen in the classroom are discussion forums. And now I'm going to turn it over to Nada to synthesize this webinar.
Great, thanks, Kenya. So as you could see from this diagram, we are really talking about this alignment, if you will, the alignment between the 5 principles for meaningful online learning. We also showed you 6 categories of learning technologies that are at the top of the triangle. And we also showed you a framework for instructional strategies that is at the bottom left vertex of the triangle. And we gave you examples of learning activities that you can design that align with some of those instructional strategies. So this figure is sort of trying to put it all together for you, right? So we have, sorry about that. So we have the meaningful online learning framework that we showed you in the first webinar that has the 5 principles of active, intentional, authentic, cooperative, and constructive that you really want to keep in mind as you're thinking about your online learning activities and online teaching and designing your courses. And within this big circle, we've got this triangle that has the learning technologies aligned with the instructional strategies and then aligned with the learning activities. This is a really important point here for this triangle. Again, going back to the concept of affordances. Remember that technology is not just a tool. So when you look at that learning technologies classification scheme that we gave you, you will see that different technologies have different affordances. And it's your job as an educator, as an instructional designer, as a faculty member, it is your job to look at these affordances and then figure out what is the primary affordance of this technology and what instructional strategies can it support. Does it support collaboration? Does it support social negotiation? Can I use it to support problem solving? Can I use it to support hypothesis generation? What can I use this technology for? What are its affordances? And then once you have made this alignment between the learning technologies and the instructional strategy, then you begin designing learning activities such as the one we just showed you with the fishbone, for example, for problem solving. We showed you how to use immersive tools for role playing, etc. So you could see that there's this alignment among the 3 components in the triangle. And then these 3 components, as you're thinking about this alignment based on the concept of affordances, you're also thinking out on the outer layer of making sure that you're infusing the active, intentional, authentic, cooperative, and constructive principles of meaningful online learning. So they're all interrelated. So we hope that this diagram sort of gives you a overview or an umbrella of how to think about meaningful online learning. So thank you for that. And you could certainly get more information about this framework and everything we've talked about in the Meaningful Online Learning textbook that we're using in our classes to support instructional designers, educators, and teachers like yourselves as we try to design more effective and more engaging and more meaningful online learning experiences for our learners. So thank you very much. If you have questions in the Q&A, and we will be seeing you on Thursday for the final webinar about developing online assessments.
Thank you so much, Nada and Genia, for this very important and very engaging webinar. As you can tell from the activity in the chat, I very much enjoyed it today. I got to learn about our attendees. Now I know some of them eat pencils. I know some of them try to escape from prison. So I've learned a lot about them. And I'm glad the last point you made was about the technology not being a tool, because it's related to a question, an interesting question, I think, that we received. So the question is, by the way, we do have a couple of questions about emergency remote teaching versus online learning. So I'm going to leave that to the last of the webinar if we have time. If not, then you can go back to our previous webinar, which is recorded, and you can take a look at that, because Nada and Genia, they explained it very well in our previous webinar. So the question was, can you please clarify why can't we consider technology on its own as a tool? Technology tools can't communicate or even create meaning without the creator and the receiver.
Okay, so let me give you an example of the steam engine, right? So the steam engine was, if you think about I don't know if you've heard of we are now in the fourth industrial revolution, right? So we're looking at AI, artificial intelligence, etc. But before we even had computers and before we even had, social media, right? In the first industrial revolution was the steam engine, right? So the steam engine changed our lives drastically. It shaped our sociocultural practice. It shaped our being able to transport and go places and explore. So that is really what we mean by technology is not just a tool. Any type of technology, whether it's the pencil that we looked at that allows you to write, the printing press. I mean, if you think about the printing press has huge impact, consequential impact on our society, on our ability to be able to print books and print newspapers and communicate with society in very different ways than when we were able to communicate with them before we even had the printing press. So the steam engine, the printing press, the assembly line, television, radio, and now social media, the internet, Web 1.0 technologies had different affordances than Web 2.0 technologies, which is what we're looking at now with social media affordances. If you think about Twitter and think about how it has both negative and positive affordances, unfortunately. I mean, Twitter can be responsible for organizing protests, if you will, socially, globally, as well as Twitter can be used for learning experiences as well. And Twitter can be used in a very negative way. So the whole point about technology not being just a tool, again, the word just a tool, because a lot of people consider technology as a means to an end. And it's like, it doesn't matter what technology I use. I can use it to do anything as long as, it's a means to an end. And really, the crux of things is me, the creator, and my educational philosophy and my learning approach or pedagogy. But it's much more than that. I don't agree with that approach. I think, as we mentioned in this webinar, and as I just said, technologies have affordances that can really shape our sociocultural practices. They can shape our governments. They can shape what we're doing as people. They can shape our society. So we are now talking about these technologies specifically on how they can support or shape our learning experiences and learning practices. And I think different technologies have different capabilities. And if we use them appropriately based on their capabilities, then we are certainly, I think, more successful and able to deliver more effective learning experiences. So I hope I have tried to explain my point here.
Okay, so we have the other question is about, she's asking, in architecture, we use 3D design programs and applications such as Revit, and I hope I pronounced it right, and 3D Max. Can those be categorized as immersive?
Absolutely, right, Genia? Absolutely. CAD, I'm familiar with CAD, computer assisted design, right? So CAD is, definitely can be classified as an immersive technology, right, Genia?
Yeah, because it is like creating a real life situation virtually. So anything that you can create a real life setting or situation in a virtual setting is considered as an immersive technology.
Okay, we have we have some questions today. I like this. So another question that we have is, we have a question from Kamil, but I'm not sure I understand the question. If you're hearing me, Kamil, maybe you can explain the question. But the question is, social media is helpful to begin my teaching project about social relationships. That's a question. So I don't fully understand it. if you guys do, maybe you can answer.
Maybe he's trying to ask if social media technologies are good technologies to use to teach a course or a project about social relationships. Well, of course, it could be depending on the purpose, I think, of the project. If the aim is to teach students how to communicate digitally online, then of course social media would be a good tool. Social media technologies would be appropriate tools to teach this subject.
Okay, so we have two more questions. If we can answer them in 5 minutes. So one question is, what is the best model of instructional design models that you prefer to design an online training course for teachers' professional development?
Great question, actually. So great question. So, I mean, as you know, the ADDIE model, but that's a little bit archaic and linear if we just stick to the linearity of the ADDIE model. But I think the backwards design model is now the one that's coming out to the forefront. There's also a model called SAMR model, like SAMR, but I think it's the backwards design model. I don't know if we mentioned that, Genia, in our first webinar. I think we had
the third, actually.
Oh, we're gonna right. We're gonna use the backwards design model in the assessment. So I think if you look up the backwards design model, it's aligning the learning objectives with the assessment and then with the instructional strategies and activities. So great question, and we recommend the backwards design model as an instructional design model to use. And instructional design models have become a lot more agile nowadays, so they're no longer that, you know, structured lockstep barrel type of models.
But one thing I would add, Nada, to the backwards design, and of course you agree with me, is to understand the learners. So the teachers, analyze the teachers' needs before you start designing instruction. So it's very important to do this step as well.
Okay, so we have another question. It's in Arabic, but I like the question. And I will repeat your answer in Arabic after you give an answer, just in case, because I'm not sure. So the question is the competition between the learning platforms and applications, this competition that's happening right now, do you think this is gonna serve or push forward e-learning, or is it gonna take us back?
Well, I think one of the affordances of technologies that we just talked about earlier in this webinar is that it supports, you know, innovative teaching practices. I think that technology is heading that way. It's becoming more innovative. It's becoming more intuitive. That's that UX design part of things. We are seeing really improvements on technology platforms. For example, the learning management systems that we're using at our higher ed institutions or in public schools, K-12 schools, they're a bit, I mean, they serve a purpose, for example, of putting all the courses there, and the analytics part is great, and being able to do discussion forums and content creation tools. But really, honestly, these learning management systems are a bit archaic. So when we see new technologies coming out, like Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams, and we also are seeing a lot more innovative technologies in synchronous platforms like the one we're using right now, Zoom, and, you know, especially with immersive technologies to create simulations and games. I think it's great that there is competition. I don't see a problem with it. The only problem is, you know, your university or your organization, once it adopts a platform and they sign a contract for 5-6 years, you know, they're kind of stuck with it. But I think all software nowadays, if you talk to computer science people, all software is always in beta version, right? I mean, so they're always testing it out. They're always coming up with new plugins. They're always trying, you know, to test it with new users. So I think it's fine. But that's why we have this, you know, selective framework for you to use. And if you also want to use open technologies that do not cost, you could do that. There's several out there, you know, versus those that you need to pay for, such as Mural and some of the others really high-end technologies that we've talked about. So thank you for the question. It's a great question as well. And, you know, we always have emerging technologies. That's the thing. And, you know, now with the fourth industrial revolution, we're also going to have a new emerging technology called AI and chatbots and everything you have there. So we need to also be aware of that and what are its cognitive possibilities.
Okay, we have one, I think we have time for just one question, if you can answer that, even though I feel like it needs more time. But someone is asking if these instructional strategies that you described today, can they be used or involved in inclusive education, or I think like supports inclusive education?
Great question.
Yeah.
Do you want to take that, Genia?
I think yes, anything can be, any of these strategies can be used in inclusive education. And when we say inclusive, it doesn't mean that students have special needs and like special needs. Some students in inclusive education are gifted. Of course, the framework that's there that Nada shared today has possibilities for engagement, for exploration, for modeling. So I think any of these strategies can be used with special needs students, of course.
I will add that, you know, you can personalize with adaptive learning systems also. Some of these instructional strategies can be implemented with technologies that allow you to customize the interface and customize the learning experience for people with special needs. Right now, everything we do, whether it's a course on Blackboard or we do a YouTube video, when we transcribe, we have to have, you know, captioning for folks with certain disabilities. It's a huge, you know, area in our field. We didn't focus on that in this webinar or these series of webinars. But as Genia said, yes, a lot of these instructional strategies, scaffolding, for example, what we call supportive strategies. I see the supportive category, the modeling and explaining, the scaffolding, and, you know, the mentoring and the coaching. I see that part of that category of instructional strategies, if you will, as being leveraged by educators like us and you in order to support people with special needs, because you could personalize the experience depending on what technology you will use. Absolutely, universal design language is now integrated in all of these educational technologies that we mentioned. So it's not so much the instructional strategies, it's more the ability of the technologies to support universal design.
Okay, it's already 8:17. So thank you so much again. As usual, amazing webinar. Thank you everyone for attending today. Also, thank you to the National E-Learning Center staff. Thank you so much for all your help and support. Don't forget to join us on Thursday for our third and last webinar. Neda and Genia will talk about assessment practices and strategies that are aligned with the Meaningful Online Learning framework. So please don't forget to join us then, and take care. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maha. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.